You made a beat on the SP404 or MPC Live or any other standalone sampler and you want to have your beat mastered and released ready to go. Maybe you want to showcase it to some potential collaborators and you need it to sound as good as possible and as loud as possible. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I master a beat using Fabfilter plugins exclusively, making it release ready and ready to conquer the world. Let's go. And as a natural supplement to this video, I got something that I call the ultimate mixing guide for producers. The link is in the description. Make sure you grab it and supercharge your mixes right away. I'll use a beat that I made just now, a couple of hours ago. I've exported it as a stereo file straight from my MPC. And the first thing that you can notice is that on the waveform, you see some hints of something wrong. It looks dynamically consistent, but you can see there are some spikes here. My shoot guess is that those spikes are some sort of buildup of many sounds. Let's see. Yeah, I was right. You could hear that. Once more. There are many options here. I can do some volume automation like this. Just use the Logic volume automation like so. Or I can use clip gain automation like this. Lower it by a couple of dB. That will do the trick. Just to show you the visual difference, I'll bounce it so you can have something to compare to. Like so. And I'll bounce another one that is the original, just to compare. You can compare these two. So here you see you don't have the spike anymore. Here's the spike. So I think I'm pretty pleased with that, but let's just listen and check if it sounds better. And here. Yeah, definitely a good choice. No artifacts. It's better for the compressor afterwards to work with a more consistent dynamic input. When you put extreme dynamics into a compressor, the compressor has to work a lot more, and then you get artifacts you may not want to have. So if you want to have artifacts, you make them. You don't want artifacts that you haven't intentionally put there. That's my philosophy, at least. We have one more spike here. I'll get rid of that as well. Let's see, a couple of dB. No more than 2.5 dB. Otherwise, it will be more audible. We have the same issue over here. Get rid of that. 2 decibels we found was the sweet spot. Let's just check if this works. Yeah, I think that's it. So there we have quite a consistent dynamic output. We don't want any rogue peaks. Sweet. Let's just listen a couple of bars and determine what we hear and what we need to fix. What we know we need is a limiter. That's the last plugin in the chain. But let's see if we need some EQ. Let's see if we need some compression or some clipping maybe. We can start with the bass. Let's open up Pro Q3 from Fabfilter and let's just look at the spectrum analyzer for a moment. I see some movement down here in the sub 20 Hertz area. I don't like that. Let's see what this is. And with the Pro Q3, we can use this listen function. Just hold this down. Now I'm using these beautiful headphones from Shure, the SRH 1840, I think they're called. They go really deep down. I think they go all the way down to 10 Hertz. It's almost impossible to hear, but I think we can be safe to high pass filter up to 20 Hertz. I think that's quite safe. It's not controversial to do 30 either. So let's go up to 30 and leave a nice 12 decibel per octave slope so that it won't cause any issues. Now let's listen to the bass in solo. Make another one of these. What do you think about the kick-bass relationship here? I'll try one more time. I don't think it's too bad because the bass lives on another frequency than the kick. You see where the kick and the bass hits? The fundamentals of the kick lives in the, I would reckon, the 60 hertz range. That's the fundamentals of the kick, and the fundamentals of the bass is a bit higher, up to 74, 80 hertz. So they're not clashing. Let's just take away this. But what we can do is we can high pass filter out some of the sides to make sure that the bass is mono. So we take another filter and we put it on side, and then you can listen. Here's another issue which has nothing to do with the bass, but it lacks stereo width. There's very little width here. It's very mono, this beat. Okay, so we'll high pass up until I think 150 more or less. So there were stereo information actually down below 150. We've taken that out. Now listen. Now we've just created more headroom, both here and there. Now let's look for offending frequencies to do some subtractive EQing. You know the cut, boost and sweep technique that I've talked about before? Well, with the Pro Q3, this is an obsolete technique. You can use this technique on old school equalizers, but here you don't need to. You just put the Q quite sharp and then you put on the headphones. Let's listen. Actually, there's a slight clash between the kick and the bass. I heard that now. If I had the individual stems, it would be an easy fix, but I don't have access to that. So there's nothing I can do that I know of other than some slight dynamic EQing like this. I think the clash was in the 70 hertz range. We've actually tamed a bit of the fight between the kick and the bass. The fight is there a bit, slightly, but I've removed some of it. Okay, let's move on. Let's look for other offending frequencies. Okay, I'm looking for frequencies that are behaving unexpectedly. Let's dive in. So far, so good. Here's the fundamental of the sample, the flute. Let's just tame that a bit right here. And I'm using a dynamic EQ now because I want the taming of the frequencies to be as unnoticeable as possible, because this is the mastering stage and I don't want to be too intrusive. And then rinse and repeat, another node and another sweep. Here's the second harmonic of the flute. Let's just tame that a bit as well to make it more consistent across the frequency range. I think we're good to go there. I didn't find any other bothersome things. Now let's close this. This is our subtractive EQ. Now let's compress a bit. We will use the Pro C2, which has some great options for some glue compression. On this beat, there is no compression other than on the drums, slight compression on the drums from the MPC and some slight saturation on the drum loop. On the others, there are some slight subtractive EQing going on, but those are broad strokes subtractive EQs. No EQ boosts. Some filter and some filter automations has been done. But okay. Setting up an SSL G-Bus compressor here. Let's look at the style. Yeah, let's try the bus. And then the attack, I'll set it to 30. And the release, quite fast, 100, say. I'll play with the threshold. Put it on some extreme settings. Now I use these extreme settings so that I hear clearly what the compressor is doing. And when I'm done, when I find the sweet spot where I feel that the different elements is breathing along with the rhythm, then I'm satisfied, and I will turn the threshold back down again, so it's only slight compression happening. Okay, I feel some breathing right now. Let's turn it down. Okay. 2 decibels of gain reduction, that's quite extreme for a mastering situation, but since there's no compression at all from the get-go, except from on the drums, I feel inclined to smash it a bit up. Now, how about we do this in series? I can just copy the same compressor, like so, and use the same settings more or less, but this time I can go to the mastering setting and make it a bit more subtle. So now we have 2.8 decibels of gain reduction going on in series. For the sake of it, let's just try to lower the attack here. Make it more of a brick wall style compressor. Back down on the threshold a bit. So we have some compression going on now. Listen. Okay, let's listen with and without. Okay, a bit cleaner at least and more consistent. When mastering, small tweaks is more than enough. Extreme when listening, extreme when tweaking, then backing down until it's almost inaudible. Subtle, subtle, subtle. And when doing this over and over again on many plugins, you will eventually get smashing pro results on your beats. Of course, what you have in the first place is actually what matters. So in the mastering stage, you can only do that many things. Of course, you can fix a lot of stuff. And if you check out this video right there, I'll go over 13 different mastering tips and tricks that you can apply to both your beats and your songs when you don't have the chance to go back to the file and fix it in the mix. So there are 13 different things that you can do. Next up, I would like to try out some coloring. I'll put on my coloring palette. What I would actually like to do is use the Bliss from Kush, but since I promised only Fabfilter plugins, let's do the Saturn. Specifically thinking about the high end. Okay, I like the crunchy amp and the heavy saturation. I think I like the heavy saturation most. Listen to this. And again, of course, subtle, subtle, subtle. This is extreme. I'll use the mix knob. You see, nothing is happening right now, but... Now that we have used a saturation plugin to cause some excitement in the high end, let's try out some stereo width tool. Now, how do we do that without having a stereo enhancer? Again, the Pro Q3, and this is a tip that I show you in the video in the description, the 13 mastering tips. It's one of those. And I'll show you here as well. So I'll create 2 bands, one at roughly 6 and one at roughly 3. And I can adjust that later on. But the thing here is that one of them I'll set to right and the other I'll set to left. I do a slight boost in the right and the left to create some stereo imaging, like so, on different frequencies. Again, extreme settings, but you get the idea. A bit down in the range to make it more hearable. And then back down. Set them to dynamic so that they're kind of expanding in both their frequency ranges. And we don't want it to be too extreme, but it's just to add a slight bit of stereo enhancement without doing any intrusive stuff. You like it? I do. Let's just listen to everything we got. I would describe this as cleaner, punchier, dynamically more consistent sounding, and sweeter in the top end, and a bit wider. I just wanted to try one thing out, and I'll create an aux. I'll put a reverb on. Okay, this is just an experiment. This is also one of the 13 tips in the 13 mastering tips video that is linked in the description. Let's see here, reverb. Let's just high pass filter. I don't care much for the EQ on this reverb. I think it's overwhelming. I'll just use a Pro Q3 and I'll put the Pro Q3 before the Pro R and I'll high pass, do a decent high pass. I only want to apply some reverb in the mid range up until about 3000. I'll try that. I'm just tweaking by ear. Let's listen. So it's kind of the snare is hugging the kick. I like that. Okay, let's play with some of the settings and it will of course sound terrible all along. Bit close up, I think is good. Stereo width, let's see. So because there's no reverb, there's no room or plate or anything on the beat. It's completely dry. Only that the samples might have some built-in reverb in them because it's not completely dry, but I think there needs to be more space on this beat. I think that sounds great. Just to make sure there's dynamically consistency, let's put on a Pro C2, another compressor. Let's blend in the reverb. Turn it down a bit. I'll bus these two together, calling this the mix bus because I'm mixing together those two. There's yet another thing that I want to do. I want to control the bass. We are nearing completion. I would like to pull up some reference tracks. I've made a whole other video about reference tracks. You can check, the link is also in the description. It's right there where I go through different ways to use references, but I don't want to play them right now because I don't want to get a copyright strike. I am listening to some references so that I get some sense of where the bass is supposed to be and where the high end is supposed to be. And the mid-range is taking care of itself right now. That was some tweaking. I like to use a multi-band compressor and use 3 bands, one for the mid-range, one for the bass, and one for the highs. And then I like to control the bass by increasing it a bit and then backing down by using the threshold so that the bass is being ducked whenever it hits a certain threshold, so it doesn't interfere too much and stays consistent and sharp and always present. I do the same for the high end, but not that much. And for the mid-range, I increase slightly and then have some slight compression going on right there. There are so many ways to use this multi-band compressor here. It's out of the scope of this video, but you can do it in mid-side mode and right, left. But for this beat, and in this case, I don't think it's necessary. There's no vocals here, so that makes it a lot easier to master. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention earlier on is that the gain staging is very important here. So you can see where it peaks. It peaks around -7 when no plugin is applied. And then I take all my plugins in, and it peaks around 8. 7, which means that I have good gain staging all the way through, especially when using the Pro C2. When playing with the threshold, the output volume tends to become a lot louder. You compensate for that by using this knob right here, output level, and then you just decrease that one. Now, it's time for our limiter. If you've not guessed it, we'll use the Pro L, and we'll use that together with both the beat and the reverb. We'll put both under the wings of the Pro L2. Okay, so we'll start off by pulling the attack down a bit, the release down a bit. Let's have a short attack, and we'll put it on transparent setting to turn off the true peak limiting. We'll put oversampling to 8x. Let's see, and let's try to find our sweet spot by working in the extreme. Okay, that's loud, and we want it loud, right? We want it loud. Okay, there's a lot of distortion, of course. Now, what I'm after now is finding out where the punch is. I want to make the beat as loud as possible without sacrificing the punch of the drums and the intelligibility of the elements, and I don't want any unwanted distortion. So those are my 3 goals, actually. Punch, intelligibility, and cleanliness. I'm going to use another limiter. So I'll put my output volume on -3. Let's look at how the output is on the stereo out. Okay, so we'll increase it up to... Let's engage it. So you always hear in tutorials that you shouldn't do this with a limiter, but as long as you use your ears and you think it sounds nice, you don't want to turn your beat into a pile of white noise, but there's a good in between here. You want it to be as loud as possible, and you know the best way to do that is of course to have the stems, but when you don't have the stems, you just have to do the next best thing, and here we go. We can also listen here what exactly is going on. So there's the decreasing there. Okay, let's take another limiter, the Pro L2 again, and this time we'll have the modern setting, turn off the true peak, put on the 8x. It's the oversampling. I'll explain that in another setting, what oversampling is, but basically it makes the audio much cleaner. Now I'll go for a slower attack on this one, and a bit slower release. Let's go for -6 here. Here I don't want to clip too much. Let's see where we're at in terms of loudness. I think I'm aiming for about -8 decibels of LUFS, loudness units full scale. This is the one that's relevant. Okay, 9. We can try to push it up a decibel. I don't know if the beat can handle it without it distorting, but we can try. No, it doesn't sound good. Better that it sounds good and the dynamics are present than it sounding distorted and loud. We can live perfectly fine with a decibel less than the other guy. That's perfectly okay. Just look at the stereo spectrum here. And now we're ready to bounce. Let's just make sure that nothing is wrong in the beginning here. Fade in, like so. And let's fade out here, just to avoid any clicks and pops in the beginning and the end. It's out of the scope of this video to explain dithering, but essentially it's the insertion of some noise to compensate when we bounce it down into a lower bitrate. When bouncing into lower bitrate, you might hear some artifacts, and these artifacts are smoothed out by some noise, and that's dithering. So especially when you hear reverb tails, if you have a reverb tail, for instance, this right here, the end of it right there, it might be affected by the reducing of bitrate if we are bouncing it to 16-bit from 24, for instance. So that's dithering in short. And on the last plugin in the chain, I can use dither. I'll dither it down to 16 bits. That's the standard bitrate for streaming platforms. I don't use dither more than once per song. So this is the only time for this beat that we are using dither. And very important, later on, if a rapper jumps on this beat, I would need to go back to my session and put his vocal on this stereo file and then export it after mixing in the vocals and then using dither, not importing the already dithered beat and dither it again with the vocals later. That's a no-no. So whenever you buy a beat from Beatstars, for example, you can ask, is this dithered? And it shouldn't be. If you're paying for a WAV file, you should ask, does this have headroom? Is the last limiter in the chain bypassed? And is the dithering off? Now let's bounce this sucker. Let's go. Now it's bouncing. Okay, so that's it. For me personally, I never do it this way. When it comes to importing a stereo file of the beat straight from my MPC, I'll always bounce each and every track. I'll explode my drum track so that I get the kick isolated, the snare isolated, and so on and so forth. When I have breaks such as this one, this is a drum break that I've used in this song, I'll just leave it like that and I'll treat the drum break with some EQ and such. But I always like the flexibility of having all the tracks down in my mixing session in Logic Pro X. That's just the way I like to work, and that way I can also sidechain different elements to each other. I can sidechain the kick to the bass, I can sidechain the drum bus to the instrument bus, I can later on sidechain the vocals to the drums, and so on and so forth, to make everything nice and clean and tucked in. But when you don't have an option, and that might be the case for many, in many situations you only have a stereo beat to work with, there are a million things, at least 13. There are at least 13 things that you can do with a stereo file. You're not completely stuck. We got so many tools nowadays that there are a lot of possibilities. The Fabfilter bundle with the Pro Q3, the Pro C2, the Pro L2, the multiband compressor, and so on and so forth is an amazing mastering bundle. Isotope has great mastering plugins. So does Slate. Universal Audio has some great mastering plugins. Waves has some great ones. AK Multimedia has some, and so on. Thanks for watching, and check out one of these two videos. It should be interesting to you if you like both mixing and mastering beats, so make sure to check those out, and I'll catch you there. Peace!